Hello, it's Sonia here with the Pretty Stitch. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time joining me, I'm so happy to have you here. So today is Wednesday, and that means it's another stitch of the week. So for today's stitch, I am going to be using my eye hook or 5.5 millimeter, and I do recommend with this stitch pattern to use at least an eye hook. Maybe an H hook would be okay. So let's just say an H and up. I mean, you certainly could use smaller hook sizes, but I just feel like this is going to be a Tunisian tutorial, and I just feel like with this particular stitch pattern, it's a little easier to use a slightly larger hook. And I am going to be using worsted weight yarn, and with this stitch pattern, you do not need to use a Tunisian hook if you don't have one. If you just want to try it out, you can use a regular straight crochet hook. You might even be able to use one with a thicker handle. Your stitches will be a little bit bunched, and you wouldn't be able to have a very large swatch, but at least you could learn the stitch. Alright, so to get started, I have my number 4 worsted weight yarn. I'm sorry, I don't know the brand. It is just some leftover of something. It's some kind of acrylic, I don't know. It's something, I'm trying to use up some stash. Alright, so for this stitch pattern, you're going to need to chain a multiple of 4 plus 1. So I'm going to chain 9. Okay, so I have my 9 chains here, and I am going to just pull up my loops. This is going to be my foundation row. So for a lot of Tunisian patterns, you need to work a foundation row. So I'm going to work in the back bump of my chain and just pull up my loops. So at the end of this row, I will have a total of 9 loops on my hook. And if you've never done Tunisian before, I do have some tutorials to get you started. Really, I feel like if you want to learn Tunisian, there's 3 basic stitches that you should know: the Tunisian simple stitch, the Tunisian purl stitch, and the Tunisian knit stitch. And after you know those guys, you're good to go. Sky's the limit with Tunisian. Alright, so we have 9 loops on our hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep. So now we're going to work a return pass. With Tunisian, it's always 2 steps. You have your forward pass and then your return pass. And that counts as 1 row. So we're going to yarn over. We'll pull through 1 stitch and yarn over and pull through 2 for the rest of this row. For row 1, our setup row. Okay, so we finished row 1. Now we're ready to do the fun part, the actual stitch pattern. Okay, so for row 2, our first stitch we're going to do is a purl stitch. So this bar right here, and I usually a lot of times they're called bars because it looks like a bar. Alright, so I'm going to have my yarn in front and just work a purl stitch. Alright, so we've worked a purl stitch. So what we're going to do now, we're going to do some yarn overs, and it's going to be a cluster type stitch. So you're going to yarn over. We are not going to work in this bar. We're going to work in between. So let me just get another hook. Actually, this one will be a better visual here. So if you're looking at this is your bar here, but we're actually going to work in between. So you're going to work in here for our next stitch. So if you just look at it, and if you look at Tunisian real closely, it kind of, in between the bars, it almost looks like a chain running through there. So hopefully you can see that. So you're going to want to put your hook underneath the chain. So this would technically be, this bar would be stitch 3 because we have 2 already, 1, 2. But again, we're going to work right in here. So right under that chain. So let me put that hook down. Alright, so I'm going to do my yarn over first. So you're just yarning over like you were working like a double crochet. And we're going to insert our hook. So I'm kind of spreading that out under that chain and pull up a loop. So now we have 4 loops on our hook. So you're going to have, usually with Tunisian, a lot of times you're going to have the same amount. Like we chained 9, and when you're done your forward pass, you would have 9 loops. We are actually going to have extra loops, but it'll be okay. All right, so we've got this first, and we're going to work the second part of the cluster. So this is a cluster. I'm going to call it a cluster. Maybe it's called something else, but we're calling it a cluster stitch for Tunisian. I'm going to yarn over again, and then I'm going to work in the next space here. So here's this bar stitch 3 right here, but we're going to go right in there and do the same thing right under that chain, pull up a loop. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So an easy way for me to help with this is with your stitch count and things like that. Consider, since we see this is the stitch 3, this bar here, so consider all of these 4 loops to be stitch 3 technically, so push them together just to kind of help you out a little bit with where you're at. Okay, so now we're going to work a purl stitch. So in between the clusters we're working a purl, so yarn in front. So here is our next bar right here, so we are working in the actual bar. So this would be stitch 4, even though we have a whole lot of loops on here, but if you count 1, 2, then these 4 loops, stitch 3, 4. So now we're going to repeat the cluster. You're going to yarn over, you're going to work right in that space next to that bar, pull up your loop, yarn over again, right in that space, pull up a loop. So now we have 1, 2, stitch 3, stitch 4, we're at stitch 5. So now we're going to work our purl stitch again. So hopefully that's making sense. Maybe it's not. Alright, so now we're going to do the cluster again, yarn over. We're going to work right back in that space next to the bar, pull up our loop, yarn over again, work right in that space, pull up a loop. So this would be stitch 7. Now we're going to work a purl stitch. So we have 2 more to go. So work the purl, and then our last stitch, I always like to work a Tunisian knit stitch. I just think it looks a little bit neater and tidier. And we're going to pull up a loop. So as you can see, we have a whole bunch of loops on our hook, a lot more than 9. I'm not even going to bother counting them. I just think that's going to make things a little bit more confusing. But now we need to work the return pass. So usually when you work a return pass, you yarn over, pull through 1 loop, and then you yarn over again and pull through 2 for the rest of the row. This is going to be a little bit different, but again, it is not going to be hard, once you understand what's going on. So to start off with, we are going to yarn over, pull through 1 loop. Now our next stitch is a purl. We're going to yarn over, pull through 2. So now our next bunch of stitches is the cluster stitch. So what we're going to do is we are going to yarn over and pull through 5 loops. So you have this loop here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 of your cluster. And then that's going to turn it back to the 1 loop, so then we'll be back to the 9 stitch count. So you can just take your time. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we've worked those guys off. So this is our purl stitch. So you're going to yarn over and just pull through the 2 like normal. Now we're back to the cluster. So you're going to pull through 5 loops again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now we're going to yarn over, pull through the 2. So we have to work off our next cluster of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got 1 more to go. 5, and now we just work off the last loops here. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So row 2 is done. Seems like we did a lot there, which we kind of did, but once you get going, I don't think this is difficult at all. Alright, so now we are going to work row 3. So row 3, we're going to yarn over, work a purl stitch. So in all of the purl stitches, you will always work a purl stitch. So now we are going to work in this cluster stitch right here. So we are going to do a Tunisian stitch working through all 4 of the loops. So I hope you can see there's loop 1, there's loop 2, there's loop 3. there's loop 4. Now some of these loops, let me get my little pointer hook, some of these loops are shorter, and this one right here, the first one, that would be the yarn over, so she's a little bit shorter, so don't forget that one. And then there's that guy, stitch 2, there's another yarn over, stitch 3, stitch 4. So we're going to work through all 4 of these guys. We're going to work a Tunisian simple stitch. So let me get that guy out of there. So just popping my hook in there, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got all 4, and just work a Tunisian simple. And see, now you can see the nice cluster. Now our next stitch, we're going to work a purl. And I often like to pop a purl stitch in between. You don't have to, but purl stitches are great to help prevent curling. Because if you're working like all simple stitch or knit stitch, Tunisian is notorious for curling. So if you, oops, sorry about bumping the camera. So if you're worried about, you know, any type of Tunisian project, pop in some purl stitches. That's really going to help with the curling situation, so you don't have to block it to death. Alright, so let's go back in and work our Tunisian knit, or not Tunisian, knit, Tunisian simple in these cluster stitches. So popping all 4 of those guys on our hook, yarn over, and pull through all 4. So now we work the Tunisian purl, and popping all 4 of those stitches on there. So we have 2 more stitches to go, so Tunisian purl and the Tunisian knit to finish it off. Now you don't have to finish the last stitch as a Tunisian knit. I mean, you can finish it however you wish, but I just prefer Tunisian knit. I just think it looks nicer. Alright, so now we are back to 9 loops, our original stitch count that we started with. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So for this row, you're just going for return pass. You yarn over, pull through 1, and yarn over, pull through 2 for the remainder of the row. So this stitch pattern is really 2 parts. You will be repeating rows 2 and 3 for the however long you want your swatch. So row 1 is your setup, and then you work rows 2 and 3. So now you see the nice little clusters there. So I will work another row 2 and another row 3, and then I will work a few more rows so you can see it in a larger swatch. So here we have a purl, so we're going to work a purl in this first stitch. So now, since we've worked our first set of clusters, you can really see the chain kind of peeking through, so you can know that it's a lot easier to work right in there now. So we'll do our yarn over, pop our hook in there, pull up a loop, yarn over, pop our hook in there, pull up a loop. So technically stitch 3. And now we are going to work our purl stitch and work the cluster in the next, and work the cluster in the next, work our purl. Now I don't know what this is called. I'm just going to call it like a Tunisian cluster stitch pattern. Maybe this has a name, I really don't know. I just kind of was playing around and just thought it was fun and decided, why not, let's make it a stitch of the week. So if it does have an actual name and you know it, please let me know in the comments. Alright, working my knit stitch. So now we have to work off these all these loops here. So yarn over, pull through 1. So whenever you're doing the purl stitches, so here you can see the little purl, you'll just pull through 2 loops like normal. And now we're at our cluster, so we're going to pull through the 5. So we have, you know, this loop here, and then we have these 4 from the cluster. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then yarn over, pull through 2 for the purl stitch, back to pulling through 5. So when you're pulling through the 5 loops, you just might need to be a little careful that you don't go too crazy and pull through an extra loop. And this yarn was splitting. There we go. Now we have the purl stitch and pulling through our last cluster. And pulling through 2 for our purl and then 2 for the remainder. So that was row 2 again, but technically it's row 4, and you can count your rows easily. Just look on the side, 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so now we're going to repeat row 3 for row 5. So yarn over, purl stitch in the first, And then we're going to work a simple stitch with all 4 of these bars here. 1, or loops, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Yarn over, or not yarn over, I'm sorry. Work a purl stitch. And work that second, the cluster stitch is kind of 2 parts. So working through all 4 of those guys. And then the purl stitch. So there's the 4. And the purl stitch for the, got 2 more stitches to go. And then our last stitch, I'm working the knit stitch. So we're back to our 9 loops on our hook, and I'll just yarn over. We'll do a normal return pass, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2 for the remainder of this row. So I think it gives it some nice texture. It's a cool stitch. So I'm going to work a few more rows. So again, you're going to want to repeat rows 2 and 3, and then I will show you how we can work these guys off. So I will meet you back. Okay, so I have actually worked 10 rows here. So if you want to finish this guy off, if you want to know how to, I recommend ending on a row, an even row. So row 2. So this is our cluster, and if you're not, again, not sure how to count the rows, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's a real easy to count on the side there. All right, so let's finish this guy off. So our first stitch is a purl stitch, so we are going to work in purl to finish this off. So once you have your, you inserted your hook in the purlwise there, you're just going to, and pull up your loop, you're just going to pull through like a slip stitch, just like that. So now we're going to finish off this cluster stitch here. So this is a Tunisian simple. We're going to put our hook in all 4 of those loops there, working Tunisian simple or bars. So there we go, and we'll just work a Tunisian simple stitch and then continue to pull through to finish off the stitch, just like that. So the next one is a purl, and just watch your tension that it doesn't get too tight. I mean, you could certainly finish off on a row 3, the odd row, but I just think this way it looks a little bit nicer. It's just my personal preference. Alright, so I'm going to pull through all 4 of those guys, Tunisian simple, that cluster stitch, and just work that off. And then the next one is purl. And simple, we're almost at the end of our row. So I think you could use this stitch for a variety of projects. Make a nice scarf, you could incorporate it into a sweater, a cowl, you could do a whole bunch of different things with it. So that one was a purl, we're at our last stitch. And that one, as I said before, I like to work Tunisian knit and pull that guy through. So now we have worked off all of our stitches, and as you can see, she lays nice and flat. So that's the magic of the purl stitches. So I hope you enjoyed this stitch of the week, and I thank you so much for watching.